few mouse and key events, how to handle them in event binding. So one more just basic example I will give you how to deal with miscellaneous events. In Angular event binding, how do we deal with some miscellaneous events? We will see that. So where is that? Yeah. These are the options we learned about mouse event binding and how to deal with them. What console error, Vishnu, right? So is that option not working for you? Okay, after the class done, once you can share the screen so that I can see. Yeah? Right. Okay, so after understanding these mouse events, now some more options we need to understand how to use the miscellaneous events, various other events. You can say various other events here we have. So we have various other events. So other Angular events. So generally we can simply categorize into other types of various events. So we have different types of events actually. All JavaScript events you can use. So there are so many events. Actually, as I already told you, all JavaScript events are valid. So we have some options like technically, I will just give a list for those events. So generally regularly used events. So how to deal with them, right? Actually, so the other regular events, event and description, a little small point about that. Technically, what are the events we have for various other general purpose? We know already some events that we discussed. We have a click event. So that means specifies actions to perform on element when element clicked. Okay, and we have options. So we have option like DBL click. So DBL click. This is specifies actions on double click. Actions on double click. So we have like context menu. So context menu usually specifies actions on right click. Right click is context menu. So we have options like select. So actions when selected, and select start. Select start is actions while selecting. That means while dragging, actually select start. Usually you have options like mostly used cut, copy and paste. So cut, copy, paste, cut, copy, paste. These are general events. So actions on cut, copy, and paste. Actions on cut, copy, paste. That means when user cuts the information, copies the information, pastes the information, we can put status messages, we can display messages and all. We have a change. So change is already learned. So when actions when value changed. And we have most commonly used options like blur. So that means actions when element lost focus. And focus is actions when element gets focus, right? So, and we have another important submit. So actions on form submit. So these are all several miscellaneous events. So several more miscellaneous events are there, right? All JavaScript miscellaneous events you can handle here. So we cannot just sit here and learn about these all events like JavaScript. It's a time waste process because generally you should know all this in general client side scripting. Here we cannot waste time in understanding all JavaScript again. Just only the point is you need to know how those events we can use according to our requirements in Angular, because already I showed you how Angular uses event binding. Only the point is you put them in your proper examples. That's it, right? So technically, we can't sit here and learn every click one example, double click another example. This is all JavaScript. So we are not going to waste any time in understanding all these events that you have to learn in your JavaScript, how to use them actually. Here in different examples, whenever we require, we will implement. And already we done so many. So on change, we learned, on click, we used. So we can use different occasions. Just some more, one example I will show you here. One regularly asked important question also. So how to handle that, we will see. Technically, suppose on cut, on copy, on blur, on focus, some interactions to be handled. Then usually what we do is, let's go to the components here. Yeah. And here we need to design some events related options. So let's temporarily, I will add one more component here. Let's add a new component. So ng generate component events demo. Okay. And skip this. Let's add the component. So once it is added, now let's keep this in the startup. Okay, and just I will create one simple example to show majority here. So like events demo, and that is events demo. Okay, and here let's keep that events demo component. Fine. That is the events demo component. Now let's open and see. So events demo is configured in the startup. Okay, right. So it is fine. Now I want some actions to perform. For example, suppose let's design one point here. So in the events demo HTML, let's add a div. Okay, so then class, so container, okay, and some div. So label, and just I will put a class as form group. Okay, then just put an option, some register, something. And here I am configuring some name as some control. So username. And here we are defining a div with a text input type is equal to text. And here I defined a placeholder. So name, here simply say block letters only. Okay, that is the option that we define. Now, usually what happens is, so we will keep a control class as form control. Form control. Now, usually this is the placeholder inside that text box. It says block letters only. Now, generally what happens is that placeholder so is removed automatically once you start typing anything. Then I need to keep the content there. I need to keep the content there until user is typing that. That means when element gets focus, we need to set some message. Then what we can do here is we can just set a message here. That message should be displayed on focus. So I'm configuring that on focus. Here we are defining like this. So public MSG. Okay, MSG is initially empty. So this is so on focus. So that means public on focus. Focus on focus. This dot MSG should display that name in block letters. Block letters. So that is the message to display. Name in block letters. Okay. So then public on blur. On blur. So this dot MSG is equal to empty. So we don't want to keep anything there. Usually what happens now, once this text box gets focus, you can write focus. When it gets focus, and on focus will be called. When it blur means it lost the focus, then on blur will be called. Okay. This and the message should be displayed in a span below. So here we want to display that MSG. So I created a span to display the message. Then you can see here, currently this is the text box. I click inside the text box, then it will get that focus. When it focus, it says name in block letters. And when I left it, it is removing the message. I click there, it is displaying. But actually they haven't entered block letters. Of course, you can define validation. You can configure the validation. So you can do a lot of things, right? You can define and configure the validation. If not entered, that means we need to verify with the pattern, what the pattern he have entered, whether it is capital letters or not, and should display a message name in block letters only. So then otherwise you can do one thing. If even if he don't enter in capital letters, we can convert that into capital letters. That means here I declared a property. So that is txt name. And let's bind this txt name with this text box. So by using two-way binding, we will bind the txt name with this text box. And what should happen is on blur, txt name is equal to, so txt this dot txt name. That means what I am doing here is whatever the name you collected from the text box, the name is applied to the same text box again. But this time we will convert into two uppercase. uppercase. To uppercase is a string function in HTML, which converts into uppercase. To uppercase is a string handling function, right? Now, what happens here is when user is typing and he is typing some name, and after typing the name, so he click outside, then it will hide the message and converts that into block letters. That means when it blurs, lost the focus, and it can display. I click inside, again it shows the alert, and I typed something. I finish it typing inside it without entering block letters, then it will be converted to caps. So this is general how it is handling the situation. That means how it is managing this. So here we are using the options like on focus, like on blur. That means when it gets focus, what it should be. When it lost the focus, then what it should be. You can manage that on focus and on blur like options. So these are events. Similarly, when you have operations like cut, copy, paste, you can handle different messages and you can configure and display the messages. So that means when user have performed the options like cut, like copy, like paste, we can show the status, because generally on mobile based environments, when currently in single page applications, one point is, so when you are working, you selected, you copied, you may think like you copied, but you went somewhere else and tried to paste that, then it is not pasting there. That means it's copy not completed properly. That is the reason it is good to show the status that it is copied. So it is removed, it is inserted from clipboard. We can do very simple here. Just what we are doing is we are defining events. So public on cut, we will just put message. This dot message is equal to removed and placed on clipboard. Actually, clipboard is a clipboard. Clipboard is the temporary memory for Windows, right? Whatever you cut, copy, it is in the clipboard actually. Then I defined another option is on copy, and here we are configuring this dot msg is equal to, so copied to clipboard, and on paste, so public on paste, so it says simply, so this dot msg, so inserted from clipboard, right? Yeah, like this. It's configuring it. Now, how you manage that here, how we can configure that. So generally what we do is here, we are calling that on various operations of that particular text box. That means cut, you have to access on cut. And similarly, we have a copy, you have to access on copy. And that is paste, so that is paste, and you have to configure on paste. And everything is replaced on that message. Then you can see it affects there. I entered some name, so okay, and you can see converted here. And I selected this and right click and say cut, then it says removed and placed on clipboard, right? And I right click and click on paste, then it says inserted from clipboard. I selected that and right click and copy, then it says copy to clipboard. And I place here and right click and paste, it says inserted. So this is the general option. So how you can handle various interactions on cut, copy, and paste. So these are all general various miscellaneous events, how we use on various occasions. So how to perform actions on cut, copy, on focus, blur. So technically we do a lot of handling of focus and blur in validations also. In other examples also we will use them. I just explained a basic thing about them. How we can manage. This is a general, very simple example to understand this. So these are the common options and the common example here. So I said events demo dot component.ts. This all general JavaScript based events. So actually anywhere in Angular, nobody will just tell you all this like these are all events, one example on event, because Angular is completely for the people who are good in JavaScript, and you can't be Angular developer without JavaScript. And if you know JavaScript, nobody needs to explain anything about events. Just they need to explain how Angular handles the events, right? That is the point, right? And what's new here, because rest of all manipulations, so is no change. Just you have to implement how you done in your JavaScript. Only the point is references will reduce here. Here you have two-way binding technique to easily access the data and manipulate the data. All examples we can manage here in a similar way, right? Yeah. So events demo.component.html. In that we are adding this logic. That's the general presentation for all of them. These are all general events. How do we manage? So all comes under miscellaneous. Change event already I showed you. And already we saw that change event, generally what you saw about the change event is not just for the combination of radio checkbox drop downs. Change event we have seen. So in shopping example, everywhere we use it, the change event. So we created a shopping cart example. There in the shopping cart example, we used a change event, how to handle interactions on the change event. We discussed about that, right? So technically, change and all these are associated with the controls also. That means what type of control you are using, based on that you can manage, even like double click and all, right? For example, sometimes, right, where we use the double click and how do we use the double click configuration. Suppose, see, DBL click. DBL click is for actually double click. You have DBL click. Context menu, that is for right click. Select is for select. Select start for is for dragging, like you have change. You can use for various events. So let's see, for example, suppose we want to create, we need to configure and create some options like elements to which we can link them up. Usually, you should not link these events with any particular control actually. So that means if anyone asks what is for which element we use click, for any element we can use click. For any element we can use double click, right? Why? Because a div also can be clicked, a link also can be clicked. So a general button also can be clicked. So these events are not associated with controls. These are associated with the browser. These are all browser events actually. So that's the reason in various occasions we use them with the different elements and different situations, right? All right. You have to know all them in general JavaScript, right? I already told you. So JavaScript events, hundreds are there, right? If you know all the JavaScript events, how to handle, then you will not ask anything about what is this, what is that, right? First, you should know perfectly about those JavaScript events, right? There are so many events. If you want to know the events, so generally, if you want to know the events, these are all general events. So general events if you want to know all the events, you can write a simple program here, for example. So that means you want to know what are the events for the elements. So working here, suppose you want to know all the events, the properties. So just I want to just click the event related properties here. Yeah, so suppose we have a button. So button, so many events are there. So here we have an option, click. So when it is clicked, and you have option like on click. On click is some insert click function will be called. Okay, into that we pass event. And if you want to get the list of all properties and events, so this is this and event, we are accepting that. That means for where property in object, it will get all the properties and display. And I'm giving document.write and the property, whatever the property is present here. So we'll print all the properties. Actually, when you see all the properties of any particular element, so these are all the properties of that particular element. In this, the properties, we will keep that in the body section somewhere, right? Insert, click, okay, yeah. And here we are configuring that. I click on this, then it has to get all the events. That means, so button on click, we are configuring all the events and displaying those events. Means we want to display all the events and show the events here, right? Yeah. So this, yeah. So here the point is event arguments, what you are passing and how you are configuring the event arguments. So defining the event arguments. So let's see here. The property is not defined at insert click. So that is property spelling. Okay, fine. Right. So it should get all the events and display the events. You can see here. Actually, so you can see these are all the events. That means on cut, on copy, on paste, on queue change, on double click, on drag, all these are the events. All these are the events. All these are the events. All these are events. So many events are configured. So many events are there. So many events will be there. These are all some events, some properties are also present here. And you will see all these are the events. These are all the events. These are all the events. These are all actually browser related events. These are all browser related events. Hundreds of events will be there. And remember, these are all just only normal events. You have touch events. So related to touch devices, you have touch events. So you can't sit and say that I want this event, I want that event, right? That is all your JavaScript, right? So whenever technically an event is used, how to configure the event and how do we define the event, we will see that. How do we manage with those events in different situations, right? Yeah. So technically, so here, my point is just to make you understand about how the events are used. And one point is you have to learn events in client-side scripting. That is general thing. That is not the point to learn in Angular. It will be complex in consuming all our time in understanding the basics of JavaScript here. I will give you some tasks on different events. So today I will post in the classroom some tasks related to different events. You try to do that, then you will get perfection on various types of events, right? Different types of events. So here, if you are aware of JavaScript, you can easily handle them. Otherwise, you perform some research on that event on JavaScript, learn it, and you have to try and implement that because that is all JavaScript based. So don't associate events with controls. So events are not associated with controls. Events are associated with our browser, right? Based on that, it works everywhere. So these all events are browser events actually. And in this one event, we have to understand correctly about here is how do we deal with the event called submit? Means how we deal with the event submit here. That is additionally you have to know. Generally, one important option you should know is about submit event, which is regular and important for us. So submit event, actually, the point about submit event is technically submit event. Generally, it defines it defines it defines defines actions to perform when form is submitted. When form is submitted. So it defines actions to perform when form is submitted. That is important about the submit event. Technically, that is the point about submit event. And very important is submit event is configured for form element. For form element. Submit event is configured for form element. And one more important point is submit event fires up only on submit button click. Only on submit button click. It will fire up only on submit button click. So that means by default form submit will work only for submit button click. Actually in HTML we have several types of buttons. Actually HTML have two types of buttons. So generally you know that HTML have two types of buttons. It comes with HTML provides two types of buttons, generic buttons and non-generic button also. Non-generic button. Generally generic button means so they have a specific functionality. Generic buttons have a specific functionality. Like generic buttons, so we have a submit button and we have a reset button. These are generic buttons actually. So that means these generic buttons by default have some functionality. Reset button have the ability to reset the form, submit have the ability to submit the form. Non-generic button is an ordinary button. So that means it is defined as a input type as button or button type as button. It is defined in this way. You can configure as input type button or button type as button. Generic buttons are defined input type as submit or input type as reset, or you can use button type as submit. You can use button type as reset. So these are generic buttons actually. And important is form submit can happen only for this generic button. Form submit can happen only for that generic button. That is generic submit button. So submit event fires up only on submit button click. So submit button click. But generally you have to submit the form on various events actually. We need to submit the form on various events. Then if you want to submit on various events, then what we have to do is explicitly you have to call submit event for other elements. For other elements. For example, sometimes we have a requirement like on drop down change, the form must be submitted. Sometimes we have an option like on drop down change, it should be submitted. Some radio button change, it should be submitted. That means when you open a page, it asks, so which city? And you selected a city, then immediately it has to display. So it should display that particular city related details. That means it has to submit that city. So that in that case, we need to configure, we need to define. So with we need to configure and define with this type of submit event. Explicitly, we need to configure them. So let's see here. For example, see, generally when you are designing this, so event. So let's keep a form here. So we are designing a form. And this form have a button. so have a button. By default, if you write button, it is a submit button actually. This is submit. This is submit by default. This is submit by default, right? Suppose you defined a button, so button, and you define the type as button. This is ordinary, ordinary button, ordinary button. This is ordinary button. And usually, so submit button can submit the form. It has a default functionality. So you don't need to write any event. The event is written inside the form. Submit event is written inside the form, submit. That means on submit, what actions to perform? What are the actions to perform? On submit, what are the actions to perform? Technically, so here on submit, what action to perform? So I am removing all this here. Just I am defining, so public on submit, on submit. So I will just put an alert, because later when we learn about integration with APIs, we can send data to a service. That data can send data into database. Service-based interactions you will see in the advanced stages later. Here initially I'm just placing an alert like form submitted. That is the option I am configuring, the form submitted. And on submit, I have to call that on submit option, on submit. That means submit event is written only for form element, and it will work for only submit button. It will not work for other buttons. Let's see this now. Actually, we have two buttons here. I click ordinary button, that event is not firing up because it is a non-generic button. It is a non-generic button. This is a generic button. By default, it has submit ability. That's the reason you click on that button, then form submit event will fire up. Then you can see you are not writing any click event for this. Then automatically form submit event will fire up. It says form submitted. Form submitted. That is one option. That means how we can manage the submit event. So form is submitted. Technically on that we have to configure, right? Now here, one more important point is there. So that means this is general, how we can configure the submit. Now, generally asked question here is, I want to submit on a drop-down change. I want to submit the form on a drop-down change. That means I am suppose defining a select, and select have an option, some reset, and select have an option, some submit. So that means when user selects that, submit, I need to submit the form. That means form submission should happen on that particular option, but this select cannot. That so here generally that is one important option is this. So select cannot define. This select cannot define directly that event, because select is mostly used with change. Then what we do is explicitly we configure that. That means public on change, explicitly on change. On change, what we can do is currently I'm just accessing on submit here. Later, when you learn about forms, you will learn about how do we call the form name and submit event. So as of now, we haven't learned about any forms in Angular. There is, we have to separately learn about forms. It is a separate concept. When you learn about forms in Angular, then you will understand how we can use a submit option for form. Form have a submit property. Currently, we don't know that. That's the reason we can directly call this submit on change. And select, what happens is on change. That means on change, it has to access on change function. On change function, you can call on change function, because on change some other activities may be done. And you can directly call submit function also here. But on change, if it is submit option value is submit, then it can submit. If option value is reset, then it can reset. We need to handle that functionality. But currently I just written on change. But on change, we have to identify So whether it is reset or submit. If it is submit, then submit. That means actually, so we have to send these values here. That means we have to send the values by using a dollar event. We can send the value. So you can send a value. And what should happen here? We are collecting that value here and we are checking the condition. So condition is if e dot target dot value is equal to, if target value is equal to submit. If it is submit, then what should happen? So this dot on submit will be called. Else, so what should happen is just put an alert. So form will reset. Something just roughly I define. That means this is defined for only that particular. And these need to have a value now. That means this is having a value as a reset and reset, and this is having a value called submit. That means we are using a very explicit technique of handling. Later, you can learn about forms in Angular, which easily tells whether the form submitted or not. We can dynamically even submit the form. Initially, you can see here, when I select that submit, then it says form submitted. And when I select here reset, it says form will reset. We are handling different interactions. So this form submit is fired up. This form submit is fired up only on submit button click. On ordinary button, it is not working. Only on submit button, it is working. On submit button, you don't need to write any event here because submit button by default have the ability to submit the form. So that is one important concept, how we can manage it, right? So this is one important concept, how do we manage? So example for this, just a simple example, how we can manage that submit. So just in the .ts file, I'm adding this logic. So in the TS file, we are adding this, and just to understand the submit option, and .html, I'm adding this one, just roughly, right? Because we will use them in a concept called services while working with services with the backend database and server-side integration. I will show you how we can submit the form and its data, because for that we need to even learn about forms. Here, the frequently asked question in this frequently asked question is in interviews. The first question is, can a form element, can a form have multiple? Can form have? You can simply say that can form have multiple submit buttons? Can a form have multiple submit buttons? What do you say? Can a form have multiple submit buttons? So a form can have multiple submit buttons. Yes, a form can have multiple submit buttons. Usually they will be. Right? That means a form can have multiple submit buttons. So yes, there can be multiple submit buttons. For example, actually, suppose here we have options like button. This is insert. Another button, so that is update. And another button, so delete. Now, here, this is the challenging one to understand, logically important also. See, these are 3 submit buttons only. So all 3 are submit buttons only. And when I click delete, form is submitted. When I click update, form is submitted. And I click insert, form is submitted. That means the point, can a form have multiple submit buttons? Yes, it can have multiple submit buttons. Then immediately another question will come is how submit event. So form submit event knows which button submitted, because because we want to handle different actions for different submit buttons. All are submit buttons. Now, can you tell how the submit button knows, how the submit event knows, form submit event knows which button submitted? Can you tell how we can manage that? By using ID. Where you will use ID? Where you will use ID? We have to add a property. Okay, how you will submit this ID to this button? How will submit that ID to the button? By passing E. By passing E means submit event. Submit event for which object? Form object, na? Submit event for form object, na? Then how it gets the button ID? For example, first suppose see, I said ID. So this is insert is an ID. And another ID, this is update is an ID. And another ID, delete is an ID. Okay. Now, just like others, you think like, suppose I say event, we are passing an event, understood? We are passing an event, right? We are configuring that event. We are passing that event. That means event is defining. So event is defining. So the object here, so event is passed. That means it is collected here. So technically it is collected here. So E. Suppose I want to see the value, what it is submitting. That means E dot target dot ID. I'm using that E dot target dot ID. So that means we are trying to access the property of that ID property here. Delete. So it is nothing. Because update, it is nothing coming here. Alert is working, nothing coming here because here. So form is not having an ID. Suppose form is having an ID, FRM home. And you can see form is having an ID. And I click on this, it gets FRM home. That means the event will send the details of the current object. It will not send the details of this button object. I hope you understood that, right? So then how you will send the details of these buttons to this particular event? I hope you understood the question. So generally, the point here is, yeah, event.target.name also belongs to form only. I just told you, right? Event belongs to form, not belongs to button. Understood? Right. So that means it belongs to that current object. Na? Event means current object. Current object is form, not buttons. Buttons. So here, usually, there is a lengthy hierarchy, but Angular will not use that lengthy hierarchy. Angular use form technique actually. So which you are going to learn in Angular forms. See, it is if it is so easy to tell about this question, then how it can be an interview question, right? So if I say that this is regularly asked in interviews, then if anybody can answer that question, then it cannot be an interview question. No? It cannot be so easy that everybody knows about it. And he will simply tell the question and interview done, right? Right? That means the point here is here. So the point here is how you will manage that, how you can configure that actually, suppose we are sending the form according to the DOM hierarchy. Actually, this is the DOM hierarchy, the form. In later stages, according to DOM hierarchy, form is a collection. Inside the collection, these are all elements. Actually, these are all elements. Suppose we will do one thing. First, observe carefully. So here I am trying to print not in an alert. I will print all the target related properties inside this console. Let's put a console here. We write a for loop for where property in e dot target event target is an object. So this object has some properties. I will put here console.log. I am printing the property here. So we are printing the property from that particular target. So you see here, so when I refresh this, and because we are printing on console, let's open that console and see. When I click on any button, delete button, you can see so many events are fired up. You can see all the properties are collected here. Event related properties are collected, and target contains so many things. And observe carefully, target contains elements. That means we are accessing all of them. So it is accessing the elements. There is an option called elements. So that means an element can have some other elements inside it. An element can have some other elements inside it. So we have elements here. That means, for example, if I say target dot elements is a option present inside it. Okay, let's save this now. Again, I am saving this and I refresh here. And I am just clicking on any particular button here. I click on any particular button. You can see element has 0, 1, 2. It has 0, 1, 2. And a named item, length and item, some properties it written. So 0, 1, 2. That means, for example, here elements 0, 1, 2. That means we want to get their values also. Then I will do one thing. So property and plus is a colon and another plus a colon. Okay, and plus I want to define. So here the e dot target dot elements of property. I want to get the property related value also. We are using that technique, related value also. That means here you can see now. So we are accessing the value of that particular element. Here when I click on delete, so it returns that it is a button. That means it is a button. That means this property is returning a button. And this button have an ID property. That means elements of 0.id. We are accessing that ID. And one more time refresh here. And I click on that button. I click on the delete button. Now it insert, update and delete. Understood? That means we need to configure. So how we can get that? That means we can get that by using target elements. We can look through the properties and we can get the ID for that particular, if it is a child element. If it is so easy, then nobody will ask you in interviews about this point, how you will identify which button has been submitted, right? So if it is so easy and everybody can tell about that, that's not a point. This is at expert level also, they ask this and they can understand. So what you are trying to explain about that, that means how much you know about the hierarchy of the elements actually. So if you know that, then you can easily handle it, right? Technically. There are other techniques, but to test your skills, they will not ask those simple techniques that generally Angular have. They will ask that, no, I want in this way to identify its name or ID. Then how you will do that? Because all others you are doing in this way. That means this target contains elements, and elements will collect all the elements and their values. So that means what we have to do is, so here we need to define different functionalities. If we have to define different functionalities, that means, for example, I am writing an iterator here. And here we are configuring. So a switch We are configuring a switch. Into the switch, that means switch, later we can write outside also right here. First, how we can get ID? Suppose I said alert, and how we can get the ID for that particular element. So that means we have to loop through all the IDs and configure that. That means it is e dot target. So we have target. So we have e dot target dot elements. Into that we have to pass the property, and the dot property, that means it will get every index number in that ID. We are configuring that. That means now you can see that it is going to return. So the element IDs, that means here you see I click on delete, it's returning insert, I update and delete. All the three are coming because we generally return in an iteration. Then which button they have clicked, we need to identify that, because currently it is reading all the properties. Which button they have clicked, we need to identify. We can access all of them, but currently I am writing a logic. So for accessing all the properties to understand the button. Now, which button is clicked, we need to identify that. That means its ID need to be passed. So we are not using an iteration here. So we are collecting. So e dot target dot elements. Now here you have to understand the logic. Suppose if I say so 0 means first element ID. This ID I am displaying as an alert. I am displaying that ID as an alert. That's what I have configured here. That means now you see when I click on this, right? So when I click on that delete or update or insert, you can see that it says that insert first, because you are anywhere you click, it is selecting insert, because you are accessing that particular element related ID. That means 0 means you are accessing that element related ID. Now here important point is, if you can send the index number of this button, also if you can send the index number of this button, then you can handle that specific functionality for the button. That means on insert, what action to perform, on update, what action to perform, on delete, what action to perform. That means what we have to do is, we need to able to send the index number of this particular button through that event. And if you can send that and you can access, then you can use it. So for that, you need some more complex options to configure here. So actually we don't do this in Angular. In Angular, we don't do this, but at expert level, they may ask these type of questions to you, because they want to just test how much hierarchical concepts you know about the elements and the events in depth about them, right? That is the reason. Here, still the problem is not solved. The point is just we understood how we can collect them. Now it's your job. So if you know this, I will just give you this example here, right? I will give you just this code here. So that means for this, I will just give you a code here. This is the code, and how we are accessing that. This is the target. Now, based on these 2 points, now you try and check, you try the point, how we can know which button click. I told you the approach, how to handle it. Based on that, you try and tell me how to know which button clicked. Now you know the concept, how we can track those elements. Then based on that, you try and tell me how we can manage that. If you can do, that's great, good. That means you can perfectly handle the situation of how the form manages different events. But actually in Angular, we don't do this, because in Angular, we have a simple technique of managing. So accessing the value of these controls on the submit event and use them, that you are going to learn in form. But you try this. If you are not, then I will tell you how we can handle that, right? But I given an approach. Based on that approach, at least you try now to understand which element is clicked. This is a regular question in interviews. So can we have multiple submit buttons, and how the submit option works for the button, right? Now, once you are aware of this, so how do we deal with the events and working with the events? So this is all about using the general JavaScript events in our Angular. So event binding techniques, how we can use. Now here one important option in Angular is how you can use the custom events, how you can configure the custom events. And to understand the custom events, we need to understand about the components and their reusability. How you can use a component in another component, how you transport data from one component to another, and how you can create your own events, configure your own events for components. That we will discuss in our next session, right? So tomorrow we will go into very major concept, components hierarchy. There we will learn about custom events, working with the custom events. That means how to transport data from one component to another and all, right? Yeah. Tomorrow we will continue with that.